Hi, this is BrassCheck, and today we have a very special call. And I know I say that a lot, but this one is particularly special to me. This is one of the great, she doesn't want to be considered a whistleblower, solely a whistleblower, and I completely understand that. We're actually going to talk about the whole phenomenon of whistleblower and people getting stuck in the whistleblower category. She's gone way beyond that, but we are going to talk a little bit about her history, what she's been through briefly, and then we're going to talk about, most importantly, what she's doing now. And this is going to be a very interesting call because really, if we just all get stuck in the whistleblower category and get known for just one event, that's not really a very progress-promoting scenario. And our guest today has broken through that, dealt with what she had to deal with, and is now expanding into all kinds of directions, and we're going to be talking about that. Our guest today is Sibel Edmonds. Sibel, welcome.
Thank you, Ken. Thank you for providing me with this opportunity.
And Sibel has a website called NewsBuds, NEWSBUDS.com, and I urge everybody to take a look at it. I'll give you the address at the end of the interview as well, but I just want to put that out there. Many, many of our listeners know your name, Sibel, and are either specifically aware of your story or maybe vaguely aware of it. Would you mind briefly talking about what you went through, and not from a victim's point of view, because I know that you're not interested in being the victim whistleblower person, but just to give people a context on where you started, how you encountered the beast, we'll call it, how you decided that you had to stand up and speak out, and then most importantly, and where we're going to spend most of our time today, is what you've done since to address the situation we find ourselves in today.
Sure, that's a long list, but please let me start by saying the website address is newsbud.com. There's no S after D, so it's newsbud, NEWSBUD.com. And I guess I have to start from the beginning. I mean, the very, very beginning. It basically boils down to the time of birth. I'm from Turkey originally. My parents, my father was half Iranian, half Azerbaijani. Azerbaijan used to be one of the former Soviet Union states. Now it's one of the nations since the end of the Cold War in that whole region of Caucasus, Central Asia region. My mother, she's from Turkey. And I lived in two countries, actually three countries, Turkey, Iran, and Azerbaijan. So I went through the revolution in Iran because my father, he was a well-known surgeon in Iran and before that in Turkey. And when I was in third grade, the revolution happened. In fact, my father was part of that revolution. And no, he was not part of any of the Islamic movement. Many people in the United States, they assume that the whole revolution in Iran was about Islamic revolution, thanks to the mainstream media portrayal of it, or even to a certain extent, the academia. But the revolution was not brought by the Islamists. Progressives, liberals, social democrats, and Islamists, and nationalists, they all got together and they said, let's put our differences aside and get rid of this monarchy. We don't want monarchy. We want a representative system in Iran.
And if I could interrupt for 1 second, it wasn't just a monarchy, it was really a tyranny with just horrendous behavior.
Absolute tyranny. My father, he was not only a doctor, he was a well-known surgeon. He was the head of one of the largest hospitals in Tehran. Tehran is the capital of Iran. And he was also a professor. He was teaching in the university, medical university there. And due his activism during Shah's regime, in fact, when I was 3.5 years old, they took my father. This is SAVAK. That was the Iranian Intelligence Services Agency back then. They came and they took my father, they interrogated him, and they pulled all his toenails out. And so the interesting thing was all the training to SAVAK was provided by the CIA. In fact, the equipments they used to torture many people, and these were journalists, these were doctors, these were attorneys, anybody who politically deviated from the standards imposed by the monarchy, by the regime, by Shah's regime. And even if you were to go further back, Ken, in 1953, a long time before I was born. Iranians actually had a chance for a democracy. There was a man named Mossadegh, and Mossadegh wanted to get rid of monarchy, nationalize oil, because Great Britain had all the right to the oil in Iran, and wanted to have voting system, the same kind of representative system that we have here in the United States. And he succeeded. He got the popular vote, and he was establishing a great government. But the United States, together with Great Britain, they decided they didn't like it back then. In 1953, they didn't like democracy in those nations. They wanted to have monarchy in those nations. So they created this coup. The coup was imposed on Iran once they had an elected government of Mossadegh, and the United States and Great Britain, with a private airplane, brought in Shah. They installed Shah. So that's basically a little bit of history there. So Shah was in power, and my father was one of the activists. The excuse they used to take in my father was several books he had in his possession. And
Wow.
yeah, and one of those books was John Steinbeck. So what they considered was that was a communist book. It was written by an American author. And the fact that he was handing it out to people and he had it in his bookshelves, and that constituted being a communist. And my father was not a communist. He was a socialist. So I grew up as an activist. In fact, during the revolution, there were many people from the university. Academia actually played a big part. These were the enlightened people who today I guess they would have called themselves progressive. Mm-hmm. And that famous, infamous day, Black Friday, I was 9.5 years old. My father was one of the organizers of that protest, and he took me with him. And it ended up being a bloody Friday.
Wow.
Well, what happened was, though, it's actually not too difficult to bring about a revolution. They set aside their differences. They said they will have representative government, all these people who participated. The most important questions become what happens the day after the revolution, Mm-hmm. When people, they say the morning after, well, that's the important part. And what happened was basically the Islamic faction, they said the faction that represented leftists, liberal, they considered them communists. They didn't belong in this representative government. So they formed a coalition and they went after the leftists. And 6 months to a year later, they formed another coalition and they went after the socialist progressives. And then they were the last man basically standing there, which became the Islamic government dictatorship that we know Iran as today. And, of course, it was something that my father never could accept. And then the war started with Iraq, and they needed surgeons because a lot of monarchist doctors had left the country. They took away our passports because our nationality was still Turkish. Our family, they were all in Turkey. So they took our passports away. They didn't let us leave the country. We wanted to leave the country. They didn't. They took my father to the front lines. And
wow.
a couple of years later, we pretended we were going for a vacation to Turkey to visit families. And they allowed only $5,000 currency or money to be taken if you're going on a vacation for 2 weeks. So we left our house behind, our cars behind, our photo albums behind, and got on the plane, pretended as we were going on a vacation to see families in Turkey, and left Iran. So I went through that revolution. Now we arrived in Turkey, and within a year, the coup happened, another coup, and this was in Turkey. And this coup again was brought by the United States and NATO in 1980 in Turkey, and they installed a military regime while we were there. And they had curfew in Istanbul until, that's where we were in the city of Istanbul, until it lasted almost till 1983, 1984. So this time we went through a military coup brought by the United States and NATO and the regime, and of course all the suffocation that comes typically with military regimes after the coup. And after finishing high school, I came to the United States in 1988. I attended universities here. I got several degrees. I went to George Washington University. I have a degree on criminal justice. I have another degree in criminal psychology. And then later I attended George Mason University, and I got my master's degree in public policy. I was not planning to stay here, but I really got to love this country. I love the fact that it was multicultural in so many levels. And I love this thing called Constitution about this country because that Constitution doesn't exist. They have what they call certain laws, but the Constitution, things like First Amendment, Bill of Rights, is unheard of in countries where I came from, or even in many European countries. I mean, First Amendment doesn't exist. For me, that's a very important thing because of what I went through with my father, but even as a student in high school. I met my husband here in 1991. We've been married for 25 years. In fact, we celebrated our 25th year last October, a month ago. Thank you very much.
And by the way, if I may just interject, that First Amendment was created because at the time that America was a colony of Britain, there was also severe, people these days sort of downplay how Britain behaved in America. But there were people who were printers who were put in jail. The army could show up at your house anytime they wanted and just move in. It was a pretty bad time. And so all those amendments that we have came from something. They didn't just come out of thin air, and they were meant to protect these fundamental rights. And we are rare. We are quite rare as a country to have that. And the First Amendment is certainly worth defending.
Or whatever we have left of it, and we'll get to that as well, whatever we have left of it, because one of the things that got my attention was the fact that First Amendment was not contingent upon anything, hinging upon anything. It was not a conditional or circumstantial right that some had it sometimes. But we'll get to that. I gained my knowledge of Constitution theoretically, thanks to the academia and reading, which I'm an avid reader. And I thought, wow, finally I have arrived in a really almost perfect country. Of course, I already had my reservations about agencies such as the CIA and all the evil deeds they inflicted upon many nations. Iran was not the only one. We have done it in South Africa. We have done it all over the world, all over the Middle East. And so I was not extremely naive, but I was still green. I was really naive because I memorized it. I knew my Bill of Rights, and I said, this is great. Even with this imperfection, with things that were really horrid, expenditure on what they call defense, what I call offense, Department of Offense, which would be more appropriate.
Well, you realize it used to be called the Department of War.
There you go. See, that would have been a much more appropriate name to keep.
Exactly.
That's the whole thing. We make everything really pretty because everybody got into marketing in this nation around, I guess, early century. And it's like, you pass a law, you call it Patriot Act.
Right.
Because if it sounds good like that, who would be opposing Patriot Act, right? So branding is very important. Our marketing is very important. So it doesn't apply only to businesses. It applies to everything in government, of course. So I was naive, and I truly believe with this imperfection, things were great, that this was finally, I have found my final home after living in 3 countries. This includes a brief period in Azerbaijan during the Soviet regime. And my husband and I, we had our own little small family business, and 9/11 happened. 9/11 happened, and within a few weeks after 9/11, I got a call. I received a call from the FBI, from the assistant director of the FBI, asking me to go and work for them as a combination of analyst and language specialist translator. I speak 4 languages fluently. I speak Turkish, Farsi, Azerbaijani, which is a Turkic-driven language, in addition to English. But I also am able to translate Dari, that's the language spoken in Afghanistan, which is, again, the same root. It has the same root as Persian Farsi language. And
I know that at that time, and even now, people with your linguistic background are really in great demand and needed.
Exactly, because I never, ever planned working for the government. It is something that it was really looked down upon in Turkey, in Iran, my mother's family, my father's family. Everybody was like, don't work ever for government. It was not about the U.S. government. It was any government. You're going to be a bureaucrat. There's so much corruption going on. There's so much headway you make. So it was not something that I ever considered doing. However, while I was studying for my bachelor degrees years before 9/11, and this was criminal psychology, I also worked for 2 years with the court system, juvenile court system in Alexandria, Virginia. I used to live in D.C. area. And I worked with sexually abused children. I became a guardian ad litem as a CASA, court-appointed special advocate. So as one of my summer training and internship, I had applied for the FBI with their division that dealt with crime against children. And this was 4 years, 5 years before 9/11.
Well,
And
so
then I had filled out. Yes.
even in the course of your life, you've been exposed to just a lot of dark things, even before 9/11. And then
Oh, absolutely. They always have been my passion. My husband and I have traveled extensively. I have worked with orphanages in Romania, in St. Petersburg, Russia, in Turkey, and later in Vietnam. My daughter, she's from Vietnam. She just 8. And in fact, I lived in Vietnam for a year and a half, and that's where I met my daughter, and she was only a few days old, and I adopted while I was working with orphanages. So children have always been my passion. And thus, I had applied for 3 months of internship in 1997 with the FBI, Crime Against Children Division. And in that application, there were some questionnaires, and in the application, and some sections asked about other qualifications. Well, of course, I had listed my languages there, not even thinking that they were relevant. Well, obviously, somebody had found that, and right after 9/11, I got that call. And they said, Ms. Edmonds, we would like for you to come and work for us immediately. And I said, well, I'm not planning to work for you. That was 4 years ago. I'm already finishing my master's degree. I have a full-time business with my husband, and I can't work for you. They said, how about contract position? Because you combine several critical languages, not only one. And considering your political background, your degrees, etc., we can really use your services. And then they used this sentence that I couldn't say no afterwards. They said, Ms. Edmonds, your country needs you and your services. Well, how could you say no? I mean, we had just gone through this horrendous, traumatic, just a few days before 9/11. And they were telling me that my services were urgently needed, and this was my chance to serve my country, okay? And I said, okay, I will work for you. Maybe I can put 15, 20 hours, which I ended up putting more than that. They put me through the clearance process, and I got the top secret clearance, which gave me access to the highest level secrets.
Really? Wow.
And I started working for Washington, D.C. field office, and I started working for several divisions, counterterrorism, counterintelligence, criminal division, because a lot of cases, they kind of intersected. Sometimes you would have maybe even a white-collar crime case, but then involving money laundering. But then certain elements of it would point out to certain terrorism-related activity. Therefore, you would have a case that would be categorized or being processed or investigated under both division in the FBI. So to make the long story short, I was doing it for several languages. I was doing that, and while I was working at the FBI's Washington field office, and I did travel to other field offices, they would detain people. They would take me as a translator, interpreter to translate interrogations. They would loan me for a very critical case, whether in New Jersey field office or New York field office. But I got exposed to certain information that pointed directly to U.S. government criminality and subsequent cover-up that was heinous in nature. And then I learned more and more about it because I had access to multiple divisions, to multiple files. In fact, I had access to more information that special agents I was working with and I was working for, because in the FBI, information is highly compartmentalized on, need-to-know basis. So as multilingual analyst and language specialist, while I could access all different divisions' files, each agent would be assigned to a particular one division, so they could only see one part of the information.
Sure. And that's a format that was created specifically after the war, I believe, by Alan Dulles. I don't know if you know the background. I'd be happy to share it in a minute.
With the CIA?
Yeah, what happened was, and we've talked about this a lot on BrassCheck over the years, there was a tremendous amount of support for Hitler by U.S. industrialists before the war, and some of that support continued during the war, and some of it continued after the war. And one of the ringmasters of that was Alan Dulles, who turned out to be the founder of the CIA. And one of his original tasks as the spy master was to basically provide cover and discover all the documents that were floating around out there that documented the involvement of certain American business people with the Hitler regime.
Yes.
And so to do that, he created a structure that within the intelligence world that made it very difficult to share. That's one of the things
Absolutely.
that the intelligence people are always complaining about. Oh, we can't share. Well, that's no one ever talks about the fact that system was consciously imposed.
Absolutely, and it continued.
And it continues, yeah, absolutely.
And it continues today.
Yeah.
And that's how I got exposed to what people know, and if people were to research, Google it, they will see that I'm the first person to expose it to Operation Gladio B. And I'm not going to get into details of that right now, but to give you an example, for example, and I'm going to make this clear, with the FBI, and I would say J. Edgar Hoover's days have never been over. It still continues today, especially the blackmail function of the FBI serving whoever is in the White House, doesn't matter, whoever is the president. But the agents I worked with, and these are the field agents, not the bureaucrats sitting in the executive office, they are referred to as SES level. I mean, these people, they were like, in the FBI, they are not like CIA agents. And I will get to tell you maybe later why I know about CIA agents, because I established my own whistleblowers organization down the road, and I had 144 whistleblowers, CIA, FBI, Department of Defense, Department of DEA, the Drug Enforcement Agency, etc. But FBI agents, the field agents, were like good, honest people, and they really wanted to go and catch the holes and do the right thing, at least the ones I worked with at the time. Mm-hmm. But, for example, certain counterintelligence division files that I worked with contained lots of files and information in all sorts of formats, video, audio, documents, text, involving congressional people, senators and representatives in the House and the Senate, and how, because they were under counterintelligence, because these people were getting money from foreign agents, from foreign countries. They various ways, through money laundering, etc. But while we were doing...
Can I just interrupt for 1 second? So for people that may not know, counterintelligence is to detect the undue influence of outside governments on our government. Would that be a fair description of?
Absolutely. And as you said, compartmentalize. So let's say when you're working counterintelligence, for the agents, basically, when you translate, you give it to them, it's just so that they know and somehow by knowledge neutralize it. So it's not for the purpose of taking the people who are committing those acts, even let's say if they are Americans, to court. You can't use it in court. And they were collected, like the phone records, the videotaping, survey, under FISA Act, and this is before 9/11. Foreign Intelligence Act, and it's not for criminal prosecution and for, purposes. So, but while you are working, and for one of the investigations that I was involved with, the files and the audio, it included information from 1997 all the way till mid-2001. So some of it was ongoing, current, real-time information. I was going through, analyzing, translating. Some of them were as old as 3-4 years old, 1997, 1998, and it involved both administrations, before Bush administration, Clinton administration, and Bush administration. But as you're going through, as a language specialist, as an analyst, through this information, you see that it's also filled with some criminal activities. It's not only espionage-related or accepting money in return for certain favors, certain vote in Congress, but it went beyond that. And one of the cases that I exposed, and in 2005, Vanity Fair article wrote a 7-page article on it, was the Speaker of the House at the time, Dennis Hastert. Mm-hmm. Well, Dennis Hastert was involved not only in receiving money, cash in suitcases, but he was involved from his Chicago office and network in heroin operations that involved certain foreign entities. Wow. And not only that, the favors that he was getting, it was not only in the forms of cash. They were delivering to one of his offices that was also his residence. He and his wife had not been living in the same house for years and years. They were delivering 14, 15 years old teenage boys, some of them Americans, some of them foreign nationals. And also during his trip as a Speaker of the House, going to countries like Cambodia, going to Turkey, they had information received that, including videotapes that showed that the foreign governments, they were delivering young boys to I'm talking about as young as 7 years old, to his suite. And the exact hotel. So you're looking at someone who was a pedophile, who was involved in drug network, who was involved in money laundering, who also abused by how he averted certain votes and did things. So you're looking at 4 different areas and 3 of them being criminals. And he was not the only one. Dennis Hastert was one of at least 13 people that I know personally, very thick files in the FBI who were in Congress. And then there were others who were in the executive branch who not only were working foreign agents, but they were involved in criminal activities and terrorism activities, including some of tourism-related operations that were directly related to 9/11. To make the long story short, the field agents, they wanted to go after these bad guys, okay? But the only reason they could go was all this information was being transferred on a daily basis to State Department, and the State Department shared it with the CIA, and the State Department and White House would actually order the FBI not to do anything, not transfer some of these files into criminal divisions so that these people would be prosecuted. Basically, they were asking them to monitor, collect information, and just let it stay as counterintelligence. Does that make sense?
It does, and I think the average person listening to this is probably, their head is probably exploding right now.
I know. See, this is the reason it's so hard to explain this case in 10 to 15 minutes.
Yeah, no, and I appreciate that. I appreciate that. So, I mean, just to a brief recap, what you're saying is that, you know, the FBI and other law enforcement organizations are keeping track of some of these people and uncovering just the most heinous criminal behavior imaginable.
Yes.
And they are then being told from higher up, or
yes,
whoever it might be, the State Department, CIA, well, just keep all that in the files.
Yes.
Don't prosecute it. And this, by the way, you know, goes back to the thing I was talking about earlier. With all the Nazi documentation. The same thing happened then. All this material was uncovered. Some of it did see the light of day, but only a fraction of it. And the rest of it was just buried. In fact, I don't know if you knew this, but Richard Nixon's first job after he got out of the Navy, or was probably, I think, still in the Navy, was to actually go through and try to find files that could be disappeared. That's why he was so supported throughout his entire political career by nefarious people, because he started out in the nefarious business. Can I just ask a question about the guy from Chicago? Can you tell me his name again? It's
Dennis Hastert, former Speaker of the House. In fact, right now he's in jail. Because even though I exposed 2005 by a 7-page article in Vanity Fair, nobody did anything about it. And in 2014, it came out that one of those teenage boys he was abusing sexually, or 2 of them, they've been blackmailing him, and he's been paying them $1 million as hush money. And he's currently in jail. He was the longest-serving Speaker of the House. Dennis Hastert, Republican. He was the Speaker of the House from 1999, taking over from Bob Livingston, and he remained the Speaker of the House until the end of 2006. Dennis Hastert.
How much of what you know about him actually made it into public awareness? I think people are more aware.
None.
Amazing.
None.
Amazing.
Even though, despite the expose in Vanity Fair, despite some interviews I have given, and I also had an under oath testimony in 2009 when I provided details for 3 hours. It was videotaped. It was for court purposes. Main media didn't print any of those. And had I even exaggerated or lied about any of this, being a whistleblower, the Justice Department would have arrested me right away, because it is a crime to lie under oath for when you're a witness in court. But no, none of them. None of the publication in Illinois published it. It was amazing. And this was, the original article was published by Vanity Fair, which is a mainstream media publication.
Sure.
It was written by David Rose. He's an investigative reporter from UA. He came for a year to the United States, investigated it, and it was not based on my words, because as you know, and as a journalist today, I wouldn't print anything based on a person's word, because maybe the person is crazy. Maybe he or she wants to bring attention or spotlight to herself or himself. They established a case, triple layers fact-checking for Vanity Fair through their legal department. They had 6 witnesses from the FBI, from the DOJ, but also from certain congressional committee staff who had seen the documents on Dennis Hastert and this. So that's when they went and printed that article, 7-page. It was not based on whistleblower Sibel Edmonds, maybe crazy, saying these stuff. But no, it didn't make it. It didn't get into any print or TV media nobody wanted to talk about that.
And then we also have then other Congress people with engaged in similar behavior.
Oh, yes. There were at least, I would say, 13 of them. Then we had high-level people, executive branch, including Department of State and Department of Defense. Some of the names have been public because other witnesses have come forward. The number 2 guy in the State Department, Bush administration, who was also an ambassador during Clinton administration to Turkey, Mark Gross, he was there. Richard Pearl was there. Douglas Feet was there. There were some very high-level executive branch people as well. So it was both the judicial and legislative and the executive branch people. And people, they think, all whistleblowers are these people who see certain wrongdoing, and then they go out on the street and they go to some reporters and they leak information. As I said, I was naive. I knew I was looking at something really big, and some other things that were happening in the FBI actually went through the whole chain of commands trying to bring attention to this. Mm-hmm. I went, before this case became public, I went to the Justice Department's own Inspector General's office, when Justice Department is Justice Department, FBI's OPR, when FBI investigates the FBI. I went to several committees, both in the Senate and the House, Senate Intelligence Committee, Senate Judiciary Committee. I had bipartisan support from Senator Grassley from Iowa, and also they were part of the Judiciary Committee. He was the chairman of the Judiciary Committee. And Senator Leahy from Vermont. They took the case, they investigated the case, they brought in some of the agents. These agents were good people. They told the truth. They said everything she's saying is true. They got documents. They went to Washington Post, and they said everything she has said had been confirmed by others. Wow. And nothing happened. Well, what happened was the FBI, these are through the executive level's order, they stormed my house. They took out my computer. They took out my husband's computer, where he has all his business information. They dragged me and they hooked me into a polygraph machine, which I passed, and they fired me. And at that point, I became a whistleblower, I guess, because I didn't consider myself a whistleblower because I'm a naturalized citizen. And when I took my citizenship oath, I thought it was supposed to be literal. And that said that you also swear, you have your solemn oath to protect your country, its constitution against foreign and domestic enemies, and that I was obligated to do what I was doing. So I took it really literally, all the stuff at Constitution. And after they fired me, I had legal representation. I wanted to expose all this to the American people, especially this being after 9/11, and so many things they still don't know today that they're being lied about. And through my lawsuit, I wanted to bring all these witnesses, including high-level witnesses and documents, and expose this major, major cover-up. Well, as soon as I went to court, the Justice Department, under John Ashcroft during the Bush administration, they invoked this gag order called state secrets privilege. At that time, this is 2002 October, that state secrets privilege executive gag order had been only used 5 times throughout the history of the United States.
Wow.
In fact, none of the attorneys I would go to had ever heard of it. They would say, state secret what? And I would say, here, they invoked the state secrets privilege. Like, we never heard of such a thing. After my case, me being the first case, then the Bush administration, and afterwards Obama administration, they started willy-nilly invoking the state secrets privilege in NSA cases, in torture, waterboarding cases, in the rendition cases, saying what it says is the state secrets privilege case says even if I'm 100% right, nothing about my case can be brought in court. I can't talk about it. The judge cannot hear about it because it entails the highest level government secrets. And if it gets to be discussed in court, it's going to destroy our national security. Mm-hmm. And the fact that they don't have to prove it to the judge because it is so critical and sensitive that the judge cannot know about it. So they don't have to show the judge evidence that this case deserves state secrets privilege. So it's a slam dunk case. They don't have to even prove it.
There's a movie that's just come out, by the way. I don't know if you've had a chance to see it. It's brand new, called National Bird, and it's about the drone program. I highly recommend it. And what's so interesting is there are some young people that were in that program in various departments who've come forward to talk about some of the abuses of that program. And they're facing the same a similar problem in that it's being claimed that the things they know are state secrets.
That's right.
But the only
and it's very effective.
Yeah, but the only secret is that the program is run cruelly and with criminal incompetence, and a lot of innocent people are getting killed. So that's
the only
secret.
time they use the state secrets privilege. Of course, it's to cover up those. They don't want the Americans to know about it. They don't want people to read about it, because we want to go and pretend we are a great democracy. We respect human rights, and we cannot shatter those illusions.
Well, I think we need to. And you're working.
Well, that's what I thought. I really did, and I thought by pushing this case, going to court to make this very long story shorter for your audience. We went to the appellate court, and this time they came and they shut down the court. They said all the reporters have to exit the court. And I went to the Supreme Court. I was represented by the ACLU, and they declared me the most gagged woman in the history of the United States. And actually, that should apply to both genders. Nobody has received, it's a multiple invocation of state secrets privilege and multiple orders, gag orders, not only on me. I just mentioned to you Senator Grassley and Senator Leahy. The Justice Department, Ashcroft, issued a formal gag order on Congress saying everything they had found through their investigations on my case was the highest level national security matters. They had to destroy all their files, and they could never talk about it. And even though this was an illegal order, because you can't have an executive branch impose a gag order on a Congress, the legislative branch, the senators actually complied. I mean, they didn't put a fight. They accepted it. So they were gagged.
Yeah, unbelievable. And if people forget or didn't know, Ashcroft, I believe, ran for Congress in Missouri against a man who was literally dead. And the dead man won. That's what contempt. That's what
I would say very fascistic. And, I'm laughing about it. Believe me, I was not laughing at the time.
Sure not.
It took away so much from my life. This battle went for years and years. By the time it got to the Supreme Court, it was 2006, and I became famous and infamous as the most gagged person in the history of U.S. And I'm a U.S. citizen. I was naturalized citizen by 1994, and they were doing this to a citizen. And the U.S. media were not writing about it. They were not. I mean, yes, it became a front page of New York Times, but it stayed there for one day, and then they moved on to another issue. And they dismissed it as, what do you say, what do you do? It's war on terror. I guess government knows best. And you couldn't even find representation. Attorneys were afraid to take on a case like this. You would go to one law office, then to another, and they would say, you can take on cases against the biggest corporations, but you don't take on a case against the FBI and DOJ, because then they had their skeletons, and God knows what they were going to receive as retaliation or get blackmailed. And so you're out there, and you have believed the Constitution and the system of checks and balances and all those great stories. Then you learn firsthand, a lot of it being illusion, that in fact there is really no system of checks and balances. Just with the court alone.
Who did represent you ultimately?
Oh, for my Supreme Court case and appellate court case, it was the ACLU.
Oh,
at the time, it was Ann Beeson and Ben Wisely.
Well, that's great. That's great that we still have, institutions that will step up like that.
Well,
wow.
Yes and no. I think they did a pretty good job, and it was nice. But I have to tell you this, had this been during a Democratic presidency, they wouldn't have accepted the case. There were people there who were pressuring the ACLU to take on the case because it was a Republican administration, it was Bush administration. They wouldn't have taken on this case. If that case had occurred during Obama administration, I'm fairly sure, I won't tell you 100% sure, because after establishing my own whistleblowers organization, there were other people with, I would say, pretty major cases that they wouldn't take. Same thing with anti-war movements, Ken.
Mm-hmm. I have to say,
anti-war movements as well. During Bush administration, millions of dollars went to fund, and rightfully so, anti-war movements against war with Iraq, etc. But all those people withdrew their funding of these organizations the moment administration changed. And look at the number of wars we have had under President Obama. I mean, we have had Somalia, we have had Syria, we have Libya, we have been bombing the hell out of Pakistan for the past 6 years, 7 years nonstop. And we are not at war with Pakistan. Why are we sending drones and bombing Pakistan every day? Nobody's there to hold anyone accountable.
I have to say that people that are, upset and concerned that we have a Republican in the White House, I don't think they understand how bad. To me, they were both deplorable, but I don't think they understand how bad it would have been if Clinton had gotten in. Whatever wars that we're seeing now would have been.
Exactly, because you know that you haven't bought into this red pill, blue pill can. And there are this, what I call irate minority, very, very small percentage of people in the United States who are able to see through this shenanigan. And they know that really, is there much difference between the two? Maybe in rhetoric a little bit, but it's not in the action. I mean, did we see the change we could really believe in 2008? Yep. Really, did we? Where did we see this change? From police state practices at home to our perpetual wars abroad, to our drone warfare, to our secret assassination program that is not even so secret any longer, where we have every Tuesday president issuing secret assassination order of people by drone. Is that the change people believe they were voting for?
I know. And what's really tragic is there's still millions and millions of Democrats who just don't get that. They just don't see it. But no. I do think more and more people, I think a lot of certainly progressive people were aware that Obama was a disaster, and given the enthusiasm that people met Bernie Sanders with, I think there are millions of people who are not at all happy with things as they are. So it's encouraging. Now we were talking earlier about the quote career of a whistleblower, and unfortunately in so many cases that event where one emerges and then gets slapped around by the government and then hopefully triumphs, that becomes it. That's their bio, and that's the end of the story. And 30 years later, 40 years later, that's what they're known for.
40 years later.
I know.
And it was a title that I didn't enjoy. I mean, I thought I was doing my civic duty. I was doing my under Constitution duty, that I was doing it for the American people, for my Constitution, for my country. That happens to be the United States. I didn't consider that blowing the whistle. They started labeling me that in Congress. Then the attorneys I got, they were looking at my case under whistleblowers law. I said, okay, fine, I'll put up with this. Okay, I'm a whistleblower, obviously. But that didn't define me. And that led me organize my own whistleblowers group, which was all these people from these agencies who had the courage to go forward and report wrongdoing on their agencies, and from CIA, from Pentagon, from DEA, and they had met several, the same kind of an end by being fired, by being ostracized, their homes being stormed, and to send a message to the rest of the people saying, thou shalt not commit such an act. When you come here, you have to zip and hush and remain silent. Just worry about your retirement, your 401k, your insurance, on all the stuff, your children's college fund, all those things. Don't go out there and destroy your whole life. Look what we do to people who do that. And guess what? It works.
It's a form of terrorism.
It is. And it terrorizes people, and a lot of people had asked how many people were exposed to this information. I would say at least a dozen of them. Why didn't they do anything about it? Well, some of them will say, I have put 15 years in this career. Another agent, a nice man, he said, I have 2 kids and my wife doesn't work and I cannot jeopardize this. So they wouldn't. They wanted to hold on to their security. They were afraid. And then seeing what happened with my case, that would send a lesson.
Sure.
Nobody was held accountable. What difference did it make? Nobody was held accountable. Nobody was prosecuted. Nothing changed. Nothing was corrected. So other than destroying my life, did it do any good? I mean, that would be their rationale. I'm not saying that's my rationale. Therefore, it's justified that we don't do anything about it. You must be crazy. And I was fortunate. My husband was very supportive. I know whistleblowers from these agencies whose spouses worked for the same agencies, and their marriages got destroyed along the way. And they didn't receive support from their spouses. We lost, my husband and I, we lost friends because one of them's son was in military. He was a lieutenant colonel, and they thought if they were to continue and associate with us, they would end up in some blacklist, and their son wouldn't get promoted. We knew another gentleman who worked, and he was a contractor with government, and he believed if he were to continue his association with us, then he would never have his contracts renewed with the federal government.
And he may have been right, because they are very vindictive, and
it's true. But you know something? See, the whole thing is a chicken or the egg thing, and that is, if those people were to dare it, and if you had thousands of whistleblowers coming from those agencies, they won't be able to retaliate against thousands. It's easy to make less. Exactly.
They would get swamped. Yeah.
Exactly.
Well,
Same thing with any kind of movement.
Let's talk then about that, your movement, which part of it is the Whistleblowers Organization.
Yes.
But you also have a news gathering and news analyst organization. Let's talk about it, because you have not been defined and stopped in your tracks as the one-time whistleblower from way back when. You actually have created an institution that has its own life and its agendas and is accomplishing things. I'd particularly be interested at first to hear about the Whistleblower Protection Organization that you created.
Well, what happened was, I lived in D.C. area, and as I was going through my case, before it became publicly really known, I was on CBS 60 Minutes in 2002, and they made this, highly edited piece. I mean, it was sympathetic towards me, but they just tried to show me as this damsel in distress. I'm this victim. Look what they did to this poor, cute little woman. She's so petite, kind of a thing. Anyhow, let's pass that section. But there were these nonprofit organizations, NGOs in Washington, D.C., and they advertised themselves as, Government Accountability Project. That would be one of them. It's $15-20 million budget. Another one was POGO, Project on Government Oversight. There are all these, I would say, half a dozen of organizations that they claimed they represented whistleblowers, and they helped them. They got them venue in Congress so they could testify. They helped them legally. It's all BS. They didn't. I went to them, and before my case was high profile, they didn't want to have anything to do with it. 144 other whistleblowers, high-level whistleblowers, people with 15, 20 years, high-level, some of them even close to executive-level positions. They really didn't do any of those stuff, yet they all had these budgets of $25-30 million coming from these foundations, and that provided this false sense of security, people saying, oh, great, we have this organization we can donate to, and they go and take care of and help these poor whistleblowers. In reality, none of that was happening.
I saw the same thing after Katrina. I was very involved in trying to get the truth out about what happened there. What happened there basically was a catastrophic engineering failure that could have been predicted and prevented, but due to corruption in the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, a great American city was almost destroyed. Anyway, all these groups sprung up, run by political operatives, to support New Orleans, help New Orleans, this New Orleans, that New Orleans, and they had phenomenal fundraising, and they didn't do anything. They didn't do a thing. They just collected money, paid salaries, paid rents, gave themselves trips around the world.
And it's very damaging, too, in a way. I would say it would border criminality, because then there are people who can do something. They say, well, there are these people out there who are doing it, so they don't need me. And it totally creates this false sense of security. And I said, you know what? And interestingly, none of these organizations at the time had a single ex-whistleblower on their board or working for them. These were all career people who were having $150,000, $200,000 salary.
Yep.
Anyhow, I said, well, why don't we form our own coalition? And we represent ourselves. We go to Congress and rally, okay?
Mm-hmm.
You have these veterans from Air Force. I'm talking about 20 years veterans. You have these veterans from NSA. So I formed our own coalition, and we did try hard, and we made some progress going to Congress, trying to shake them up, do something. For example, the state secrets privilege. The Congress can put a stop to that. But they are not. Same thing with this illusionary Whistleblowers Protection Act. Every couple of years, they go, they amend it, and they come and they clap for each other. They have a standing ovation. They get medals saying we passed. The laws have been getting worse and worse with whistleblowers protection. Everything is in fine detail. So you see those things that sounds good. All you have to do, go and look at the footnotes and references. You see that none of them have teeth.
Wow.
As long as you go to the same walls, it's like, you want to bring a case against mafia, and you go to the mafia and say, you help me bring a case against you.
Right.
You can't have FBI's own OPR do something about the FBI. And not only that, with National Security Intelligence Agency whistleblowers, they take away so many rights. For example, if we go to court, we don't have the right to jury. We have to go to federal court, and the case that gets decided by a federal judge. So you can't have jury trials. So if you have 12 men and women making decisions looking at evidence, you may have a chance, a good chance, but with federal judges, especially the way they are appointed, you don't have a chance.
And also they can put a case in front of the judge that they know is going to look negatively on any
You want to hear this, Ken? You're going to get a kick out of this. When we filed our case in court in Washington, D.C. federal court, my attorneys were saying, great, we got this judge who is not a Bush administration Republican. He's a Democrat, so he's going to be sympathetic. 2 weeks later, they got a notice from court saying, without any reason cited, that the case was removed from that judge and was given to Judge Reggie Walton. Well, Judge Reggie Walton had been a year before that appointed by Bush administration, and before that, Judge Reggie Walton led the Office of Drug Czar in the White House for Bush.
Wow.
And my case involved heroin that was being brought into the United States with some of this money laundering scheme that made it into the pockets of some of these high-level elected officials.
Wow.
So anyhow, Judge Reggie Walton, so you're absolutely right. The judge shopping goes on, plus they can pressure judges. One of my whistleblowers was this veteran agent who actually got to retire from the FBI in 2002. Anyhow, in early 90s, one of his main tasks was, you know how the presidents, they come up with the judge nominees. They want to have nominees that they want to. So they asked the FBI to do background checks on these nominees, on these judges. Mm-hmm. And he actually testified to this fact. It was the opposite. Any judges that the background showed squeaky clean, these are for only federal courts, by the way. I don't know about the other courts in the country, that their background showed clean, squeaky clean, would be excluded. Only judges with the skeletons were cleared to go forward.
Right, because they can be controlled and used.
There you go. And people would think this is a conspiracy theory. Well, this decorated FBI agent testified to this fact in Congress, but you wouldn't hear it. They wouldn't print it on Washington Post. And then after all the activities with our whistleblowers, one of the things that I realized was the key thing here was the media. Mm-hmm. That what facilitated the court not performing their duties, doing what they are actually supposed to be doing. For Congress to do what they're supposed to be doing, and that's representing the people, their best interest, not representing the interest of the FBI or CIA or some military-industrial complex, or the White House. What facilitated all these wrongdoing and subsequent cover-up was the media.
Yes.
Because I believe had the American people got to see these things, these cases, if they were able to watch it on TV and read it, there would be an outrage. But they were the gatekeepers. So,
well, yeah. I mean, if you look at what we just went through, this presidential election, the media protected Hillary Clinton. There's no reason she should have been the nominee. She had to have massive media protection to get that nomination. There's really no reason Donald Trump should have been the nominee. But the media enabled that. But now check this out. Not only did they enable this shambles of an election, now they're promoting the idea that we're in the middle of a civil war between, the Trump and the Clinton people. Well, the average American has no interest in being in any kind of a screaming match with his fellow citizen. Maybe a conversation, but so they not only created the shambles of an election. Now they're trying to really create a lot of distension, and
they're fueling it. They're fueling it. This is a synthetically created situation.
Yes. And
it is part of a greater agenda. You're absolutely right, Ken, and this is also part of this divide and conquer tactic that has been time after time successful. They are pitting black against white. Yep. They are constantly Muslims against the Christians. It's constantly divide and then divide. Even they're dividing people based on gender. And it has been part of the modus operandi, and unfortunately it has been successful. I mean, we have with our news organization, with some of the investigative pieces put out there, we have traced some of the funding to George Soros. And I ask people, why would George Soros put so many $1 million in this particular thing to have this rally? Just ask yourself.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean,
ask yourself.
Yeah, exactly. He's a financier. He's a banker.
He's part of the 0.001%. And I again ask people, can you find any point where George Soros' interest intersects with the people's interest? None whatsoever. And yet he's financing this with all these great founding organizations. And if you look at how many hundreds of millions of dollars he's pouring into so-called alternative media, Ken.
Yeah, so-called.
So-called alternative media. People, they said, we don't want corporate media, right? New York Times, Washington Post with the corporate advertisement. That's good. I agree with that. But then they go to this so-called alternative media. If they were to go and look at what they're going to see, they're going to see George Soros. Each one of them are receiving millions of dollars from George Soros, millions of dollars from Carnegie Foundation, millions of dollars from Rockefeller Foundation or Koch brothers. You're looking at the same corporatists.
Exactly, and I'm sure none of them have managed to find your door to knock on.
Oh, my goodness. Oh, my goodness. Well, you know what? Actually, it's like people going and getting inoculated. One of the things I learned during my time in Washington, D.C., in 2012, my husband and I, we moved to Bend, Oregon. 110,000 population. It's on the eastern side of the Cascade Mountains, so we don't have Portland's rain. It's high desert climate. It's beautiful. It's wonderful, and it's good to be away from all the lobbyists and all that horrible. That's the real Sin City. It's not Las Vegas. Anyhow, one of the things I learned during this setting up my coalition was I found out how they get to control these NGOs. So what they do is they get you set up as 501c3, okay? So you're a nonprofit, so you can get tax break. It all sounds good, right? Mm-hmm. Then if you want to get grants from these big ones, I'm talking about George Soros. I'm not talking about small family foundations who are doing good for the people. I'm talking about from these mega corporate foundations such as Rockefeller and Soros, etc. So they came to me. Soros' Tides Foundation through MoveOn.org. They came and they said, this is great. If you're going to do this whistleblowers organization, we are willing to give you seed $150,000 for the year 2014. And I have not set up my organization as 501c3. However, we want you to set up this board of director and a board of advisor. I said, okay, all my whistleblowers are on the board. They're like, no. We want to see these names on your board of directors and board of advisors. And you start looking at the names, and you're like, So the decision-making is going to go through them. And then they asked me, they had the audacity, this is George Soros' people, they said, we see you have these 132 whistleblowers, and a lot of them are through Bush administration, but we see these three names here. This particular guy, he was with the DEA in Detroit office. He blew the whistle during the Clinton administration. Kick him out. I'm like, what? He's like, well, it's not relevant. Right now we are fighting against all the evil George Bush is bringing. Let's not meddle and mix up the Clinton administration era whistleblowers. It was like revelation. I was like, this is how the game is played. So we give you the seed money, okay, big money. So you set up your organization, you hire people, so you have to make their salary, so you have to be able to go back the next year, beg for more money, and you have to keep them happy, and you're going to be their servants. I said, that's it. I am not going to set it up as 501c3, and I am not going to have that kind of board of advisors, I don't like bureaucracy anyway. I'm an action-oriented person. Same thing with my media organization. I said, media is doing this. Well, I'm going to set up our own media organization. Get independent reporters, not from the left, not from the right, not the red pill, blue pill. In fact, we didn't even cover anything on this election.
Great, thank you for that.
Thing to do.
Thank you for your service to your country for not covering
the
election.
It was the most unpopular thing any media organization can do, I guess, today, because we would go and check these so-called alternatives and everything. One is screaming about that one, the other one is screaming about that one. It's like nauseating, not a single thing. I've been running the site for 8 years. Anyhow, I said, not 501c3. I don't want those foundation sugar daddies. This is my language. This is what I call them. Yeah. You go and get these sugar daddies, then you become dependent upon them. meaning you have the staff, you want to make it the next year, and it's just like an unending thing. It's the same thing as politicians running this. They start getting big donations, campaign money, giving promises, and they're going to spend the rest of their career as representative of the people pleasing the few. Well, it's not different. So our media organization, Newsbud, it's S Corporation. Everything is totally set up as, state administration, our tax, everything is as clean as the squeaky it can get. None of these advisors boards, we have all our team members are partners in this. They are great investigative journalists and producers. None of them are known as either Republican or Democrat. And they have track record to prove it. And we only operate from funding, donation, pledges, subscription from the people, meaning the only people who can put us out of business is the people there. And guess what? If we are not good, they should put us out of business. We're not going to keep operating because we have some sugar daddies who are funding us that way. And that's the only model I would operate under. I can't imagine any other model that would be considered 100% independent. We don't have any advertisements.
That's great, and we've looked into the nonprofit thing too, and there's actually also a lot of lack of flexibility built into the nonprofit structure.
Oh my goodness, Ken, Are you kidding me? That's how they come and get you by your kahunas. That's what they do. Because when you look at the forms, IRS codes that the 501c3 comes with, there are hundreds of pages. And it's so easy to violate. That means immediately you have to go and make an arrangement with a law firm that makes sure you don't violate any of those hundreds of codes. They will never go after some of these really criminals. But, for example, your nonprofit, if you say something that in some way can be considered lobbying for, let's say, for someone who's running for office, third party, and they can come and say, no, you were promoting as lobbying, and that you cannot do under 501c3. You say, I'm not lobbying. But no, under this code, you violated this by having these guests and spending more than 15% of your broadcast on a particular issue or a particular person. They can come and get you.
Yep, and then
even if they lose in court.
Yep, and then on the other side, they give donors the sort of devious benefit of saying, oh, well, if you give 501c or 5, how do you say it,
501c3, they get tax deductible.
Exactly.
You don't pay tax, but you know something, Ken, I'm sure you know this because you seem to be one of those aware people. There is no free lunch when it comes to government. They're going to forgive that tax because they know what benefit they are getting. They have you. They have chained you. It's the worst thing you can do. Business model is S Corporation. Are they bleeding giving that 25-30% tax? Sure, but I rather give away that tax, which is going to be used for the drone wars, murdering people in Yemen, innocent children becoming orphaned, then go through the 501c3 route and give them the string so they can, even if they lose in court, if IRS takes you to court, they can spend taxpayers' money, $3 million against you. You have to go and find money to hire attorneys to defend you. Even if you win your case, they have already bankrupted you, taking you.
Exactly. So if you see an organization like Sibel's that is not a nonprofit, understand why it's not. And we've talked about it now, and we could probably talk all night about this one thing, but it's just really clear. There's no free lunch. The nonprofit structure has been...
And you shouldn't do it either. That would be my advice.
Oh, I'm not doing it. No, we looked into it, and once I realized what was involved, and I also realized you pointed out what peril and vulnerability it puts the operator to. Now, if you're the Clinton Foundation, you don't have to worry. But
see, we have produced several videos on Clinton Foundation. For example, he's a controversial figure, this Mullah Fethullah Gulen, and hundreds of thousands of dollars, this guy, who is now wanted in Turkey after this coup attempt in Turkey. They want U.S. to extradite him, et cetera, et cetera. But exactly, they would never go after those big ones, no. But if you're in this media thing, you're trying to raise awareness, which is what you're doing through your programs and through your podcast, and you're trying to do this, and especially if you're independent-minded, you're going to be on their list. You want to be on top of their list.
Absolutely. And as an independent, as a business, you are not vulnerable to that. You're a publishing business. So you actually have the full protection, theoretically, of the First Amendment.
Absolutely.
So it's a much smarter way to go. So I want to encourage people who are dissatisfied with the mainstream news media, don't just complain about it. Look for groups that are worthy of your support. And NewsBud, I mean, you've heard Sibel's story today, and it's only the fraction of the whole story, but you can see where she's coming from. You know, her family endured terrible things in a tyranny. She knows tyranny firsthand. She came to this country with a desire to participate and contribute. When the government asked her, will you help us after 9/11, even though it wasn't in her best interest to do it, she stepped up, just like so many millions of Americans have, because they believed it was the right thing to do. She's discovered things that are hair-curling about what's going on at the highest levels of our government. She stood up, took a huge personal price, but now has created two organizations, one to support whistleblowers. What's the name of that group?
It's National Security Whistleblowers Coalition, and it is a coalition. That's why we didn't even call it organization. And NewsBud as a media organization, that's one of the main things we are doing, because we realize one of the things these people need, for example, they need an outlet to put out information. I'm not necessarily talking about leaks, but to come and to be able to. We, for example, featured NSA whistleblower Russell Tice in 2008, and this was long before Edward Snowden. And we featured, and he was part of Mensa Society, and he was one of the highest level when it comes to the technical part of NSA operation. And not only he talked about the illegal operations of NSA, he also talked about the blackmail factor, which I knew what FBI was doing, but I had no idea that NSA was engaged in similar operations in collecting dirt on our political figures, people in Congress, etc. And so that is one of the best services that you can provide for whistleblowers, to provide that outlet to feature them. And that's more important than trying to go and rally in Congress and say, pass a law, because from what we have seen, every time they pass a law, they make things worse. I think maybe the problem is they have passed way too many. Maybe we have to go back to basic. It's back to the Bill of Rights and see how many of them are actually alive, those amendments. Really, how much of it we have really? Or is it just some kind of a skeleton? And with NewsBud, that's what we are doing. And as far as the independence goes, one of our producers, he's in Australia. He's a great video editor, but he's also an activist. We have another who's a Canadian who moved to Japan, and he's married to a very nice Japanese lady, and he's in Japan, so he's out of Japan. We have an analyst in Germany. We have analysts in the Balkans and in Russia, and we have people here all over the country, but they are all independent. They all get paid, because people don't realize, like when we produce videos, which is almost on daily basis, some of them are roundtable, like this conversation we had here, going on for 1 hour. Yeah. But once that 1 hour recording is over, it goes to our production people, and they insert the needed footage and images. And if they are talking about certain things, the documentation, if they use the various Adobe Premiere Pro systems, I'm technologically challenged, so forgive me if I'm not very clear with these things. On average, they spend 15 hours on a 30 to 45 minutes video to put it out there.
Absolutely.
It is, and currently we have a Kickstarter, and in our Kickstarter, everything is spelled out. It's like, here are our people, here are the stuff we are doing, everything is out there for everyone to see, plus the track record, because we've been around since 2008. And here you can go and see the work. If you detect a single thing that reeks with partisanship, please don't donate, because we are not in that business. I loathe it. I loathe this divide and conquer, which we inherited from the Brits,
Absolutely. Yeah, they're the masters of it. And so newsbud.com is doing the kinds of things that you would think that, the New York Times or the Los Angeles Times or CNN or any of these huge media corporations, you think, oh, well, they must have people. No, they don't. They don't have people doing this work. This work is being done by very few people and nobody, or with the exception of groups like NewsBud, is doing it on the behalf of the people. By the time something appears on CNN or is in the New York Times, it's gone through so much filtering and so much politics that you can almost assume that it's 100% wrong.
It is. May I give one quick example
Please.
of one of our recent exposés, which was written about all over the world, from the Russian newspaper and TV to Turkey to Germany to France, but none of the mainstream media covered because it involved them. There was this attempted coup in Turkey. Do you remember that in July?
Yes, of course, recently, yeah.
As it was unfolding, and people here in mainstream media was declaring a done deal, the coup was almost over and it had won, NB News, they put it on their Twitter. They put this news. They said that the president of Turkey, Erdogan, is currently on the plane flying over Germany and seeking asylum and requesting permission to land, so he has fled the country.
I remember that.
Now, I'm from Turkey. We exposed that. We were the ones who caught that, and we put it out there on Twitter. We put a video on it, and then that was a psychological coup. They wanted the Turkish people, because everybody was like in the dark, thinking that their leader had fled the country, to say, stop the resistance. It's over, folks. It's over. Even your leader has escaped the country. And the leader was in Istanbul, just was getting ready to give a press conference, right?
Yep.
And then we said, you have to be held accountable, NBC. And then they said they got that from their high-level source in Pentagon, right?
Yep.
So we said, who's the higher-level source? They are not answering. My crew and I, including camera people, we got on the plane from Bend, Oregon, which took us 16 hours because it's a small city. We have to go to Phoenix, and then from there to JFK. And then we went in front of the headquarters in NBC. And it was very interesting. Some of our supporters, international and national, showed up there. And we said, we are here, and we try to make appointments. We want to see comments, and we want you to apologize to the public here in the United States by putting false information and not issuing retraction.
Mm-hmm.
Their security guards, they came down. Then they put this quarantine things, and they said, no, they are not going to come. And we are in front of their headquarters. And we showed, we said, they did that during Gaddafi, Libya. They are not media. They are the extension of these black ops that CIA is conducting, or the coups that we are creating. Of course, to a certain degree, it's personal to me because I have gone through the coups created and perceived here and implemented there, but it's nobody else would expose or hold them accountable. And it's time for some accountability, Ken, because we can moan about it and we can just be grumpy about it, but we need to take that a couple of steps further, because moaning and being grumpy about it is not going to, being disgusted about it is not going to do good. We need to translate all this into action, and this is our way of taking action, and that is to expose this and let people know. And it starts with the truth, with the knowledge, with the information. It starts with waking up, but then that needs to translate at some point into some action.
Absolutely. I mean, action takes a lot of time, and people need to be supported while they're doing this very important work for us, and that's what this is really all about. You know, the New York Times and CNN are not working for us; they're working for their advertisers and or whatever political people have managed to infiltrate the New York Times and CNN, etc. There really are very few news outlets that are for us, and NewsBud is one of them. So I want to encourage everybody as we wrap up this call with Sibel. Her point is very well taken. We all know the news media is rubbish, so we could just repeat that over and over again, or we could do something about it. And if a lot of people gave a little bit, NewsBud would be completely funded. Overnight.
That's absolutely true, because you're looking at these the supposed alternative media and their budget, and you look at what we are doing for fundraising, because we are not operating out of these overheads and these different boards. It is very lean. It's extremely lean. People can see the bios of everyone, and compared to the production and the analysis and articles, for example, we have Christian Sorensen. He was an Air Force veteran, and he every month produces this 40-page report spelling out every contract, no-bid contract, Pentagon sent to whom, for how much. 40 pages. And if you go and see how it's organized, we are the only one who is doing this, performing this, meaning taking one by one all the no-bid contracts between Pentagon and the various military-industrial complex players. Then you look at the number, the billions of dollars per month. It is mind-boggling, Ken. It's mind-boggling.
Yeah, and then they'll tell us that they've lost $5 trillion and they don't know where it went. And then the next day they're reporting on a completely another story.
That's absolutely. And we are operating lean. Right now our Kickstarter is seeking $130,000 for our phase 2. And it's out there. And the Kickstarter, here's the beauty of Kickstarter. It is all or nothing. So there's like, okay, pros and cons. Cons is like, even if you were to get $128,000 and you're short by $2,000, you don't get a penny. Nobody's credit card gets charged. You know why that is that way? They have set it up.
How come?
Because they make you really sharpen your pencil and say, here are the objectives and here is what we're going to deliver, and the minimum amount we need is this. So if you don't make your minimum, and let's say you make half of it, then the promises you're making to the people, the objectives, that means you're not going to deliver those, right? Is it going to be exactly 50% of those? So in a way, it's not fair to the people who have donated and pledged, meaning, well, what am I giving for? Because even if you get 30,000, people you guys gonna pocket it, but you're not gonna deliver the stuff you state you're gonna definitely deliver. So it's like a contractual thing, saying we make this much, which is the minimum, and you're gonna get these stuff, and this is this operation, and all the expenses. Everything is spelled out for everyone to see. Does it make it difficult? Yes. But on the other hand, I think in a way it's more ethical, meaning this is the minimum, and if you don't make it, you won't be able to deliver this stuff. So it's a pretty clear thing there. It's very strictly spelled out there, meaning if you don't get there, nobody's credit cards get charged.
It's like a contract with potential donors. Here's
what we can do. I like that.
And when does your, do you know when your Kickstarter ends?
It ends in 12 days. It ends on the Thanksgiving Day ends. So it ends like on the 24th, end of 24th.
Okay, well, we'll make sure we get this up before that.
Thank you very much, Ken. And
absolutely.
I hope you will be willing to become our guest, because I didn't even know about you. Someone recommended, and they said, you've been doing this for years. And I'm like, see, I didn't know about this.
Oh, I can tell you stories about media censorship and distortion and intimidation from law enforcement.
We would love to network. And as you get a chance to look at some of our roundtable videos, we bring, people from the media, other, analysts, and then we have this really uncensored debate. And we would love to have you on our show on some of these topics. So now I know you have my email address as well, but we would love to have you on, and I didn't know. That's another great thing about doing this networking is you get to see other people doing similar things, and that's positive. That tells you that we certainly can maintain hope for real change, because it's not only one whistleblower or 10 or 5 real independent alternative media person, activists. There is more and more. And the more we see, the more heartening it becomes, because that tells us that we have a chance, that really together we have a chance. It's not that helpless, because one of the things the system wants is induce that learned helplessness. A lot of people shrug, oh yeah, I know how corrupt and disgusting it is, but it will never change. It's always been this way, it will always be that way, and it will continue. I can't stand that mentality.
No, if we believe that, we should still be living in a cave with a fire and eating raw meat.
Why even live? I wouldn't want to really live. I mean, I come from a line of fighters. My father fought till the age 63. He passed away at the age 63. But that's what this life is, and it's not like hatred fight. That's another thing they want to induce, hatred.
Right.
Blue pill hating. I mean, you go to some of these so-called alternatives, and you see how much hatred there is there.
Yeah.
It's so disheartening, filled with hate. And I don't want to say we have to be Gandhi and keep talking about love and say kumbaya. I'm not saying that, but the optimism, it just withers. It dies. when I'm looking at my daughter and she's 8,
Mm-hmm.
I just can't help but get filled with so much energy and optimism because it's for them too. It's for them too.
Of course. And interestingly enough, something that was told to me by, believe it or not, a Russian special operations guy, in their military, he once said his motto was no love, no hate, just work. In other words, we got a job to do, and that's what we're focused on, getting it done. We don't get all involved in the emotion of it all. If I could tell you I'll just tell you a really quick story, and then we'll wrap it up. I was the person who organized and sponsored and put together the very first conference ever on the use of the World Wide Web as a publishing medium and a commercial medium in 1994. And Wired Magazine sent 6 reporters to our conference. But I was a very progressive person. I still am. And I was completely, they would take material from me, from our conference, from things that I wrote, repackage it as their own, and present it without any predation of me at all. And the only time they would present me was as some kind of a kook, some kind of a nut, So I experienced all this a long time ago firsthand. Because objectively, I did very important things at an important time in history, but you would never hear of me because the media just completely anybody. It wasn't
the perception management. They can create images, non-existent things.
Oh yeah.
It happened because it happened in my neck of woods. This whole Malheur, the Oregon standoff thing, and I'm not saying that everything about it was right, but I saw what they were doing. They were coming there, and they were staking out, and they were picking 2-3 real crazy people. I mean, they really acted crazy. They would photograph that, and they would put those as the face of this program.
Right, exactly.
The trickery is, they have a lot of it down pat with both psychological, the psyops, in terms of how to push buttons, how to program, and also they are the masters of image making. Whether it is a political candidate or if they want to, that's what they do with whistleblowers all the time. Show them as this mad, hysterical, eccentric, crazy, It may be my mouth open because I'm from Turkey, I mean, from where I come from, Mediterranean people, they use their hands, like Italians. We are just captures, and my mouth is open like an alligator with my hands and say, yep. There's that one. You see how crazy she is? Whoo, eccentric.
Right. There's 10,000 images they could have used of you, right? But
of course, no. That would never happen.
Yeah. Well, I would love someday maybe to be a guest on one of the things you do and share some of my, because I can tell you about how Wired Magazine was used in the early days of the Internet to completely shut down any progressive political discussion. And I can show you how the founders of Wired Magazine were all crypto-fascists with horrific backgrounds, and they absolutely had an iron lock on all reporting about the Internet and digital media in the very early formative years. And they basically, anybody who was progressive, and there were many of us in the early days of the Internet who were very progressive. I mean, that's why we worked so hard to bring the Internet into being, because we saw it as a progressive tool.
I would love to have you on as a guest and have this as a topic, and you would love to have as a second person on the panel to have James Corbett, who's in Japan. I don't know if you have seen his production.
Oh, I know James. I'm a huge fan.
James is my partner.
Yeah.
He just published an update for this Kickstarter, and he is one of those people that very few, maybe outside my husband, I can't have anyone else I can swear by on integrity. First of all, he's a genius, and I'm not saying it as like a compliment. He's a genius. I mean, this guy has these several capabilities in different categories combined in one. As an author, writer, researcher, but also he's technologically very savvy. He's an incredible critical thinker. He works with us because before we became Newsblood, we operated under Boiling Frogs Post,
yes,
the analogy, you boil the frogs, etc.
Yeah.
And he was producing for us, and that was before his YouTube channel had taken off. But he's been our partner since 2008, and for many of our investigative reports, he is my number one trusted source to go to.
Oh, absolutely. We probably mail, because our model is we do an email a day. Every email features a video that we found that we think is worthy of attention and consideration. And so we probably mail, and we've mailed a lot of your stuff too, by the way, over the years, but we probably mail something from James's once a month at a minimum. So we know him, our viewers know him, and yeah, we have the highest respect for him.
Likewise, I have to say, he is, if they were to say number one, your favorite journalist out there doing an amazing work, I would say James. And he and I both work with Brock West, who's in Australia, and Brock does partly James Corbett's editing now, and he also is one of our video editors, and he's in Australia. He lives north of Brisbane. And in fact, we're going to go to Japan and work on a documentary with James Corbett, because it was through James Corbett that I exposed Operation Gladio B under those gag orders and state secrets privilege, and we are planning to produce a documentary on this jointly on Operation Gladio B. So some of it is going to be in Japan, so I'm going to be going to Japan. He's going to be going to Belgium, then I'm going to be going to Belgium in front of the NATO headquarters there. But anyhow, that's whom I was going to have with you. I was going to have on the panel myself, you, and James on this topic on Wired Magazine.
That would be so much fun. And I think as people listen, they should, they can imagine that, we're Sibel and James, and not just sitting behind their computer in a basement. You have to go places. You have to talk to people. You have to pay visits. You have to do, and of course the video work is very time-consuming. So
we went to Greece. We went there to cover the refugee crisis, another one that they totally misrepresented.
Yeah.
The Syrian refugee crisis in Europe and the way they are making broadcasting. We went there. We were 4 days in Athens and in Lesbos. We went to the camp. We talked with the refugees. We filmed it. We saw some of these dubious NGOs, etc. I didn't want to cut you off, but that was another trip we made in end of September. My camera crew and I, we went there, and it was 3 days travel to get there for 3.5 days and turning around and coming back, but it was worth it. It was really worth it.
Yeah, so I hope that in addition to going to newsbud.com, everyone will share this interview with your friends and colleagues who are interested in this topic, because we don't need to despair. We don't need to throw our hands in the air. We need to find who's doing good work. And here's a case of an organization, a group, a network, and a coalition of people that are doing great work, and they're doing it very cost-effectively. And, for what it would cost to hire one lazy New York Times reporter, they have a whole news team traveling the world telling us stories and exposing us to news that we can't get from almost any other source. So that's newsbud.com. Go check it out, and also share this one with friends. This was an important one. A lot of people know Sibel's name. I don't think everybody knows the full story going back to her childhood and the things that her family endured, and I think it puts all this in context. There are people who are willing to put it all out there and take huge personal risks, and and do the reporting that we need. And the minimum that we should be doing is supporting them. So, Sibel, thank you so much for this time. I really appreciate it, and appreciate all the work that you've done, and looking forward to doing more things with you in the future.
Likewise. Thankful and greatly, greatly, greatly appreciated, Ken, and really, really great to know you. I had no idea. It was done in such a spare of moment that the referral that came. I'm so thankful that we had this session, and I hope I'm going to subscribe to your program, so I will start getting that as well, your program. So if you were to send me by email how I can subscribe to your program, so I'll receive your daily content, and also to have you on our show. So this was a pleasure meeting you.
Well, likewise. And everybody, that's newsbud.com.